Hey guys, my name's Dale, and you're watching The Factoid. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's that time again. The Olympics, and more specifically the 2014 Sochi Winter Olympics have started up, with a completely unforgettable opening ceremony to boot. It's time for the games to begin. But with that said, something that I've noticed over the years is that the Olympic competitions keep changing. They keep adding new ones and getting rid of old ones. For example, baseball used to be an Olympic sport all the way up until 2008, but they recently removed it. But they also added two new Olympic sports to the roster, being golf and rugby for the 2016 Olympics. So that got me thinking, what are some of the Olympic events that used to be in the Olympics that no longer are? So what I'd like to do with you guys is talk about some of the more interesting events that they removed. And I think you might find some quite entertaining. I'll tell you what, I definitely came across a goldmine of interesting facts. So let's get started. Now, one of the early and more interesting Olympic events that I found was water motorsports, which was basically people racing each other on motorboats. Which actually sounds kind of interesting. But being that the Olympic Committee felt like it wasn't really Olympic-y, in a sense because it was mostly machines that were doing the work and people were just kind of controlling the machine. They felt the need to remove it. And it was only one Olympics in the 1908 Olympics. So the speedboats actually looked like this. Little tacky. Another interesting one was rugby. Now they're re-adding rugby, but rugby used to be in the Olympics, but it was eventually removed. Mostly because there weren't enough people competing in it. And the same goes for lacrosse. Lacrosse was another sport that used to be in the Olympics, but they had to get rid of it due to lack of interest. Now one that I find really interesting is croquet. Croquet actually used to be in the Olympics. And I'm not gonna lie, it'd be really funny to watch because that sport can be extremely aggravating sometimes. But speaking of interesting sports that can be aggravating, polo and tug-of-war both used to be in the Olympics. Polo was eventually removed due to lack of interest, and tug-of-war was removed for the same reason. So you can find that a lot of sports in the olden times were removed for lack of interest. Being that tug-of-war itself was in the Olympics from 1900 to 1920. But I'm not gonna lie, but I think someone should petition to get tug-of-war back in, because that, honest to God, would be the most fun thing to watch. Could you imagine just getting like your country's strongest of the strong and then compete with each other trying to pull a rope from each other? I think it'd be funny, and I would love to see that come back. With baseball and softball being removed, the list is growing. But it doesn't mean they can't add them back once they're removed. So there's always hope for baseball, softball, and hey, rugby fans. Plus all the other sports, like tug-of-war. But one of the more interesting group of competitions that people didn't know about was the art competitions. Yes, the Olympics used to give out medals, which would count to the nation's overall medal count in the fields of architecture, literature, music, painting and graphic arts, and sculpture. Each of them having smaller subdivisions within themselves. But the competitions within themselves range from being extremely awesome sounding to really unbelievably boring sounding. So let's get into the subgroups, the groups that people could compete with for medals. In the grouping architecture, there used to be two events within it, one being architectural design and town planning. Yes, town planning. It was an Olympic event to plan and map out towns. That makes every other sport in the Olympics sound so much fun. Even the really dumb ones. Architecture is definitely one of the more iffy ones, I feel. Now, literature is really unbelievable that they would actually have this competition, because it was making poems. There are three types of poems that you could take part in, whether it be lyric work, dramatic work, or epic works, which range in size of poems and complexity and how they're narrated. So people from different languages would compete with each other through poems. I don't know how you could do that. That doesn't even make sense because you could actually have so much biasness. I mean, if a judge is, let's say, English, only knows English, and they listen to a person speak and do a poem in English, to them that might sound much more pleasing than, say, if someone's doing it in Russian or Arabic or Chinese. I mean, you just can't compete with that. I mean, if someone crosses a line, doesn't matter what language they speak, doesn't matter, they cross that line, they win. But it's so opinionated and subjective to decide, oh, well, I like this poem more, when you can't even understand most of the other ones. So they got rid of it, and I kind of agree with that. Now, probably the coolest one, which is music, they had a singing competition, which was pretty much people singing opera and trying to outdo each other with that. They also had instrumental and chamber and choral and orchestra competitions. Meaning that they literally had orchestras from different countries compete with each other to see who did the best. That sounds freaking awesome. That is one of the ones I wish they didn't get rid of, even though I know it doesn't entail sports, sadly. Have you ever seen a conductor try to conduct, that's hard stuff. That's hard stuff. But that's definitely one of the more interesting ones that I found. The next one is painting and graphic arts. Having competitions in oil and watercolors, engraving and etching, and applied arts and crafts. Applied arts and crafts. What are they doing? Spaghetti art? It just sounds silly to me. Like, could you imagine trying to televise that? I feel like it would go something like this. Last but not least, sculpture. Now this one I find interesting because when I think of the Olympics, I think of like the ancient Greeks and their amazing sculptures. And that said, some of the competitions that were available in this field were statues were one, reliefs were one, and medals and plaques were the other. And like I said, people will compete with each other on a massive world stage in these competitions for gold medals. But the Olympics is always changing, and it's interesting to see where they come from and where they're going. So with that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. From wherever you are in the world, I wish your country luck. And if you don't have a country competing in this year's Olympics, root for Jamaica, because God knows they need it. So my question for you guys is if you could add any sport to the Olympics, what would you add? With that said, my name's Dale, you're watching The Factoid, and remember, never stop learning. Watermelons are berries. If you like my videos, please stay tuned for more. Videos on the facts that almost everybody missed. Hesperidian, and Hesperidians have a leathery